Good morning, Electric Culture of Safety Line Team. Welcome aboard. We've got Mr. Danny Rains here today. A special guy. He's been around this utility industry for about, 50 plus years, Danny? A lot. Wow. And 4 years ago, almost to the day, Danny came and he gave electric system grounding. That was 002 when we just started Electric Culture of Safety 4 years ago. And here he is today bringing his number 3 presentation. Amazing. Contractor management. I'm really excited about this one. I think this is going to be very informative and very deep for everybody. I think we're all going to learn something from this today. And just real quick, Mr. Danny Rains, he was here for 042. He talked about gloving and cover up. And if you don't have that, just go to electricculturesafety.com and go down the list, click on resources and go to Linemen Safety National Webinars and find 042 and pick it up. Find 002 and of course today's as well. And grab a hold of it. Danny has a book here, Legends of an Ole Lineman. And what's really cool is that's a great title because I believe that folks who could retire but want to continue training and teaching and instructing after that retirement age, I think they're legends in themselves and they continue to give back. I really like that. Mr. Danny Rains with Rains Safety Solutions, LLC, he drove here on his own time and dime just to share this with you all. That's what the ECOS is all about, giving back. So welcome aboard, and the Legends of an Ole Lineman. I'm going to read one thing out of this. Danny shares experiences and some really neat stuff in here. And one of these things, I want to read this real quick paragraph. Now, there should be no questions as to why the OSHA regulations are worded the way they are for the protection of the employees. We did not have OSHA regulations then, and it was expected that everyone would do the right thing. No one makes these mistakes intentionally, but mistakes can and do happen because we are all human. And here's parentheses right here. That little event could have been deadly, but was not. I learned a valuable lesson of not making assumptions. Opening a switch does not mean that the equipment is now de-energized. Y'all need to remember that. It just means the switch is opened. Thank the good Lord for those lessons. And this book is great. Danny shares a lot of lessons, a lot of scenarios and his experiences, and it just keeps us right here fresh and on track. So, Mr. Danny, thank you, brother, for everything you do. Thank you.
Good morning. Glad to be here, and thank you, Brent, for all the kind words. Yeah, it has been long, 57 years. I started when I was 3. No, not really. But anyway, it feels like 57 years right now. And of course, I'm glad to be back here again in South Carolina and putting this presentation on. The only problem I have is every time I come up here, it's cloudy, windy, and this time it's cold and it's fixing to rain. Last time, I think the first time was we getting the first side of a hurricane or something. I can't remember now what it was, but I know this tent, we all wondered if the tent was going to survive, but it did. But anyway, it is so good to be here today, and I want to talk about contractor management and kind of give you a little background on this. Before I left Georgia Power, and I'd worked there 40 years, so I was a safety consultant for distribution and transmission. And then all of a sudden they looked around one day and they realized they had just about as many contractors working on the system as they did employees. It was just that time. That was around in the early 2000s. And I said, And the next thing I knew, I was asked to do a presentation. We put together a presentation very similar to this. I've edited it and improved it quite a bit since then with some examples. But there was a lot going on then. And then when the 1999 multi-employer citation policy came out, and when it was stated in OSHA, I got to remember that was a policy, not a regulation. But when it came out, it gave work direction to field officers, CSHOs, on how to handle contractors and host employers, which was a good thing. But that also brought to the realization that host employers are semi-responsible for what's going on out there, but there is a line between the independent contractors and the host contractor. There are responsibilities and accountabilities. And that's what I want to cover today. We'll spend about an hour or so here, go through some things, and give you some examples and talk about some of the things I've had to investigate the last, I guess, 10 years of my business, my company. I've probably had 40 cases, and most of them were contractors working on someone else's system. And, either the OSHA side, I've always worked with the defendants, and what I found out is the companies usually are doing what they should do, and sometimes, unfortunately, we don't do what we're supposed to do while we're doing the work. But you can see a little bit about me, but it's not about me today. It's going to be about this. And this is what I was just talking about, the multi-employer citation policy. That was a result of an incident that happened in the early 90s. And of course, they wrote a policy right there when there was, if I remember correctly, there was 15 contractors got killed on one site. And when OSHA investigated, there was no host employers around. And they said, well, who's responsible for this? Who's accountable for these actions? So they did the investigation, and then as a result of that investigation and findings, this policy was written. And the prime responsibilities of who's in charge, And I have had many cases since then, and I'm going to show you a couple of them as we go through this, to where there was some confusion about just how to manage the contractors. Because what happens when you don't follow that multi-employer citation policy, then you open the door for multiple citations for the host and the contractor. And that's the sad part about it all. So you also have some IRS complications, common law employees. There's some confusion. Is it a permanent employee, a part-time employee, a contract employee, or an independent contractor? The host and the independent contractor all has certain responsibilities and accountabilities to each one of those employees. But there's really, when you really look at the big thing, there's no difference between a permanent, a part-time, and a contract employee. It all depends on who's doing what, who's paying, who is furnishing all of the things for it, training and work direction. That's the two main differences right there between the host and the independent contractor. So we'll go through these. Now, also workers, record keeping, compensation, who keeps records, what records are you responsible for if you're the host and you have contractors working on your system? How do you determine if they're qualified to do the work? And that's what I find to be the biggest problem in the industry right now. There's a lot of people out there, bless their hearts. I have had several different cases where a lineman had 2.5 years cutting time, and a certificate from a college or something. It's kind of hard. That's a hard pill to swallow. Who's responsible for training? Who's responsible for supervision? And those are the two main ingredients of this pie right here that we're going to talk about. And then what's spelled out now in regulatory compliance, because we're talking about the multi-employer citation policy, but in 2014, and we'll see it here in just a minute, when Dave Wallace and the crew in Washington rewrote 1910-269, then all of a sudden they became 269A, 3, and 4. And that is because we were hiring linemen off the street, existing linemen, and also hiring people that comes in as contractors. What is the host's obligation to those contractors? So, and there it is there. It's A, 3, and 4. All right, there's what it looked like, and you can see that thing came out, you look at there, December the 10th of 1999. It's been in place ever since. I've been in several court cases and given depositions, and this policy still comes up. But even that's a policy. But you still now then you got the regulation. So it's got a little bit greater teeth in the regulation now dealing with contractors. So let's look at this. It basically what the multi-employer citation policy clarified: exposing, creating, controlling, and correcting. Employers fall under one of those four categories, okay? They expose their employees to something, all right, in the work task. They either created the hazard. Now see, this one is the one that gets everybody upset. Controlling employer. Well, obviously, the employee's working for the contractor's controlling, but the question came up, and especially there was a fatality happened in my area that I was called in, and I gave this presentation, or one very similar to it, and I had about 4 insurance companies there from Georgia Federated, not Federated Insurance was there. There was some Georgia attorneys there, and for 3 different organizations and the contractor attorneys. And when it came to this one topic right here, that general supervision, boy, that's a dangerous statement. Without clarification, you're not real sure what's going on there. But the bottom line is, silence is consent. If the host employer has a contract coordinator, a bird dog or whatever you want to call them, and they are out there and somebody's violating the standard or regulation, they're also violating their contract, by the way, because whatever's in that written contract is what you got to live by. You agreed to it. And if you're going to follow all the rules and regulations, and then it comes down to the topic of interpreting the regulations, which a lot of people have some trouble with that. They can't quite get it. Well, when you fail to correct, that's oversight. That's seeing it and not saying it. Then you've opened the door for liabilities, for OSHA citations and everything. If you created it, whether it's the contractor or whether it's the host, it's a hazard, and it's got to be identified. If it violates an OSHA regulation, it's got to be pointed out, and it's got to be addressed. If the host contractor fails to do it for their supervision, that's one thing. But again, too, if you have a host representative on site and they see it and don't call it to their attention, and of course, many contracts have stop work authority in it for bird dogs or contract coordinators. You see something that's that bad, say no. I had someone call me the other day, last week, matter of fact, and they needed on-site observations on new jobs. And basically they was building a substation and building distribution circuits. And the first question I asked them, I said, if I furnish you contract coordinators after and I'm doing observations on these crews, will it have stop work authority in that contract? Because you gotta have it. You cannot stand there and let somebody get hurt. If the host contractor fails to enforce the general industry or construction standards like fall protection, something like that, or PPE, that's an oversight, but the bottom line is it's still a violation. There's some pictures in here to kind of break up the monotony of the reading of these regulations. And of course, that's the building, I think, of the Empire State Building in New York back in the 30s. And these are the kind of things we used to do. I think that's a violation. Yeah, it is a violation. So if I'm the exposing, that's the employer who owns the employees or is paying the employees, and they're exposing them to the hazard. Created the violation, as we said. The subcontractor working for the general contractor system fails to implement also, say, fall protection, 1926-500. Say subcontractors working for independent contractors who in turn are working for a host. See, it can get really nasty, as you go through this thing. The bottom line, if we remember this, if we don't remember anything else, ever who's out there looking at that contractor working needs a copy of that contract, and they need to understand that contract, and they need to understand regulations. Because if they don't recognize a violation, that's another animal altogether. But just be sure that you have a copy of that contract available, because that's a legal document. That's a signed contract by both parties. Yes, we're going to agree to do this. So if they're violating a regulation, they're also violating their contract. And then, of course, you know what that means. Correcting employers could and will probably be cited for failure to correct, as we said earlier. So, that's one of the things that I see pretty often is the failure to correct when you had a chance. If there's a fall protection issue out there, that's teamwork, guys. Look at that thing. If those three don't move, the other one don't fall. He's good, man. We are a team. There's no doubt in my mind that. All right, let's talk about the correcting employer just a little bit more. Is he engaged in a common undertaking? I'm paying a contractor to do something I can't or won't or don't have the resources to do. Well, I'm the correcting employer when it comes to violations if it's actually known and not addressed. Not cover up. And of course, I don't want to get on cover up today because I could talk for 3 hours on it. Because if you really look at all the things that happen in the world out there, the electrical contacts and things of that nature, all of that could be solved, a good part of it, by proper cover up. And that's just the bottom line. Every time I investigate an accident, they either didn't check for the absence of voltage, wear their gloves, or they violated minimum approach by improper cover up. I'm sorry. That was the end of the investigation. If we're not 100% compliant, well, I don't need my hard hat right now. I'm only going to get out of the truck for a minute, or I don't need to wear my safety glasses. You're violating the standard. If you're on a job site, if it's a company policy, you're violating your company policies. If you're exposed to things, then you're violating the regulation. It's as simple as that. And of course, the failure to identify. I always go back to make sure that we understand we've got to identify. Contractors are a valuable resource to all of the industry right now. I don't know how many contract customers that I assist whenever they call and ask me to do something. I'm more than happy to do it. I will give them what they need to hear. And of course, following up on contractors, just like that picture right there, that was actually a job that I went out to look at one time after the contractor was finished. And he wasn't quite finished. Neither was this. And that single phase primary right there, that's a transformer on that pole, and that ground wire rolled up like that. What is that? Somebody's got to hook that up. Now they either got to de-energize transformer, whatever, or wear rubber gloves is what they need to do to actually hook it up. You can't leave stuff like that. If you see that out there in the field and you have contractors or employees or anybody else working and they do this, then that's obviously a violation. It's a hazard not only to the employees but to the public. So now you're looking at two sources of liability. So back to the controlling employer. General supervision is the term. It's in that multi-employer citation policy. That don't mean I'm telling contractors what to do. That just means I'm making sure they're following the contract and the regulations. That's what I call general that's my interpretation anyway. Authority over that work site, and that includes the stop work if it's needed. Due diligence and reasonable, okay? And I hear this term used quite often. Did you provide reasonable care and due diligence to the people in the field? Okay, and that's not just contractors, but that's employees too. If you detect violations on on the job site, what do you do with them? How do you address those? And that controlling employer knows about the safety history of these contractors. They should be doing this. I know we had a qualification process that we went through to let contractors actually work on our system at the company I worked for 40 years. If they had a bad reputation, they probably didn't cut the mustard. They didn't get on. So required to correct non-compliance of regulations. Well, there's another thing about that too, and we'll mention it later on toward the end of this program. There's a thing called an EMR, an experience modification rate, that is directly affected by workers' comp costs and by OSHA citations and just the history of the company. And that EMR has got to be under 1. If it's over 1, you may not even get to bid on a job, because that may be a stipulation on bidding on it that your EMR rate is below 1. And most companies keep it under 1. But I'll give you a minute to think about that, and you can see what the possibilities could happen. So I won't go into that right now. You know, people violate, and it doesn't matter whether it's utility workers or whether it's just general work. I see it all the time driving up and down the road. And here's an example right here. You know, does his employer, now he's working for someone, he's a permanent employee of a contract company, but that contract company probably has a contract to maintain whatever. This is a typical violation that goes uncorrected because there's not probably anybody, there's no oversight on that at all. Unless somebody picks up the phone and calls, you know, they're not going to do it. I know, I drive around quite a bit now. I used to fly all over the country back in my early days with my company, but I do more driving local now than I do flying, thank goodness. I see a lot. Oh, I see a lot. And I just wonder how long you do stuff like that before something happens. This is another customer here. They were working for an extremely large public utility. You know, it was a investor-owned utility. And they had a terrible reputation. I was told, and when I was hired by the company that hired me to go down and do inspections, said they've had some bad luck. They've had 3 fatalities in about 6 months. And I said, do what? You know, how do you do that? Good Lord. Well, when I got down there and started looking around, you know, I had a lot of pictures, and I just put this one in here just for an example. If you were out there watching this job site, how many things you see wrong in that one picture right there? There's several. I mean, it's 3 that just should pop right out at you. But this is what I'm talking about. This is after they had 3 fatalities. So they didn't even do their homework and clean their act up. So, you know, in essence, it's what the message to me was, I don't know what regulatory compliance looks like. And I know people do not like to read regulations, and I'm sorry, but if they're the minimum and you're not operating by the minimum, then you're in trouble. That's the only thing I got to say. You know, unsafe performance by employees, this happens all the time. Look at the back of that truck right there. You know, there's a blanket laying there, and there's a steel bracket laying on top of that blanket. Is that the proper way to store a blanket? And this is not staged now. These are things that I've run up on, okay? You know, it's just what it is. You know, when you conduct operations, if you don't have the training and understanding of the regulations, and you fail to follow safety rules, sooner or later, something's going to happen, you know. Proper storage and maintenance, you know, just if it looks bad, it probably is bad. If they don't pass what I call the smell test. Of course, the failure to wear PPE is not the number one thing, okay? Well, let's just look. Now, we talked about the multi-employer citation policy, and I'm going to look at some regulations here. As I said before, as of the 2014 update, which finally became law, I guess, after lawsuits and everything else in 2015, about August, I think August 31st was the last one on minimum approach that was actually finally got anything above 161 kV. Well, there was the FR, the issues, long pants and long sleeve shirts, and didn't have enough, and blah, 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 all that stuff. But here's where this popped up. You know, they told us there was 4 major changes in the 269 standard. We've been waiting on this thing since 1994. And we had really been waiting on it since about 2005 or 6. We had a company-wide meeting, Southern Company meeting, and we were told, well, they're updating 269. Everybody in the room stood up and said, yay, because there was so many things that changed since 94. And this is one of them. Now, instead of the multi-employer citation policy, they put this in there, 1910-269A3 and on to 4. This is basically information transfer. So this is what the host owes the contractor, okay? Before. Keywords, always look for keywords in regulations. Most of the time, the contractors hit the trail and start working before they ever see the contract. Do they get the characteristics of the system? And we'll see that in a minute. No, we're just gonna go to work. We'll start setting poles and putting guys down and doing all this other stuff. Not necessarily the best thing. The characteristics is what's really important. Why is that important? Well, you got to know the available fault current to get the right size grounds. You got to know the incident energy exposure to get the right calorie of clothing, FR arc rated clothing. There's a lot of things about that system. I mean, if you've got a history of bad poles, arms, insulators breaking, those are some of the characteristics of the system that they're going to be working on. Now, OSHA did take it into consideration. No, we ain't gonna have to go out and re-engineer the system for you. We're gonna use existing data on all these facts that we're gonna give you. And that it's gonna make it easier for you, but you're gonna have the information you need to be able to be regulatory and safe when you're working there. Certain conditions related to safety of the work being performed. Okay, maybe you're in a bad place. Maybe you're following a tree crew or something that sprayed certain chemicals on right away. I mean, there's 1,000 different things that could be going on. Maybe the environment you're working on. Well, you're gonna be working at Hartsfield International Airport. The noise level right there average is about 114 to 130 decibels when planes are taking off and landing. So what are you gonna do about that, contractor, while you're working on my system? Because the 1910-95 here in conservation program requires you to protect them, the PPE. Just giving you some examples, okay? That's all I'm doing. The design and operation of the system. What kind of relays you got? What are they set at? You know, if you got Schweitzer relays or if you got other, what do you got on the system? Is anything defective or do you have history of, you make an assessment of historical assessment of what you got out there, it's fine. The host employer, again, has to furnish this information to your contractor, you know, as a result of being a successful bidder and awarding this contract. But before work begins, I'll go back and reiterate that one more time. And then anything else is pertinent about the design and operation, anything. So again, you can see reasonable cause due diligence. Don't leave anything out. That's the only thing I can tell you. If it's pertinent to safety in the operations of the system for the employees doing the work and their safety, then you need to take care of it, okay? Contract employers shall comply with the following requirements. Now we left the host, now we're talking about contractors. The contract employer, he's got to relay this information to employees. I wonder if that always happens. One way you can find out is look at a job briefing, look at, or maybe just stand there and listen to a job briefing or a work plan for the day. You might find something interesting. That's the only thing I can tell you. The result of information communicated, you know, make sure that the employees of the contractor are aware of everything the host told the contractor. You should have a pre-construction meeting. It's just like going on a storm. Before we go on a storm and start working on a system for someone else, that system, you know, it's like I tell people all the time, utilities all over this country's got one regulation to follow, that one, okay, that we're looking at right now. But everything's different. Whether you're a Y or Y Delta system, or whether you're a Delta system or a 5-conductor Y or a single conductor Y and the earth and ground return. As Bill Martin would say, you know, they're all different. Yeah, I said the only thing we got in common is the big end of the pole goes in the ground. And from that point on, it's what you want. And that's what's got to be communicated to the contractor. There it is again. And that's the standard, not Danny's words. Before work begins, contract employer should advise the host employee of any unique hazards presented by their work. In other words, okay, I'm gonna be working on your system, but I'm gonna be working at X, Y, and Z. Do you have employees present? okay? Because they're already required to protect the public, whether it be traffic or whatever. And we'll go into some other things in just a few minutes when I get a little bit deeper into this about what they have to do. But they got to talk to, and then something else that they got to do. Unanticipated hazard conditions found the contract employees work. The host did not mention. Oh well, I forgot to tell you about that. that don't. If all of a sudden, I'll kind of give you an example. Say we're hiring somebody to go out and do capacitor work. They're gonna change out capacitors or street lights or anything else, and we get out there and they find something unique out there. In other words, they see something out there that could affect their work, like bad poles, bad arms, bad insulators, whatever. If the host employer did not tell the contractor, they were supposed to. And so the really unique thing about this is, you see what that says right there? The contract employer shall provide this information to the host employer within 2 working days after discovering the hazardous condition. Maybe they sent them down the road to work on something, and the exposure limit for whatever at a chemical plant was above what they were exposed to, and he didn't tell them about it. Those are the kind of things I'm talking about. So I've never seen one of those notifications, by the way. I've never seen the contract employer actually inform the host, oh, you forgot to tell me about this one, within 2 days. Just a thought. Contract employer, and here's probably one of the most important lines in the entire presentation. The contract employer and the host employer shall coordinate. This one paragraph right here has caused a lot of heartburn with a lot of different companies because they interpret it differently. They shall coordinate their work rules and procedures. Here's a couple examples that I'll give you. And one of the most common is, well, we wear sleeves when we're doing line work here, okay? Well, the host employer don't wear sleeves. Or the host employer does wear sleeves, but the contractor don't normally wear them. Why? Well, if one's or the other is the case, if the host employer expects the contract employer to wear sleeves doing hot distribution work, then it's got to be in the contract. Because if it's not in the contract, what is their minimum regulation requirement? And it's the standard. And if they follow paragraph L 234, 269, and they apply rubber, and they do however, sleeves are not required when you cover appropriately and you apply the cover without exposing the upper arm. And that's just one of the things. I've seen that one pop up so many times. And there'll be a line crew for the host employer pass by, and the contractor will have a ground, system safety ground, and using it for a mechanical jumper. Holy moly, we don't do that. Well, nothing says you can't do it. If it's big enough ground, it's got the loading, you're not overloading it, and you're installing it correctly, and it's built according to the ASTM standard, why not? You put a piece of bare wire up there, but you got to cover it up. You got to put a gut on it. Those are just some of the things that I've ran into and seen. It's really interesting. And again, it all comes back down to the understanding of what the regulation requires and what's written in the contract. And that's the most important thing. Here's what the minimums are. These are the characteristics. This was taken at, because of the preamble and because of all the prior meetings up to the update of 269. Here's what with the minimum things we're supposed to tell them. The nominal system voltage, okay, phase-to-phase voltage. Maximum switching TOVs, transient over voltages, especially for transmission. And then when the chance or location of the hazardous induced voltages. Well, they should know that. They should be able to look at, if I got an overbill of 138 kV transmission line sitting on top of a 12 kV distribution line and I'm gonna reconductor it, there's going to be induced voltages, but you got to put it out there. It's got to be communicated to the contractor some way. Some people put together a little binder. They get together a little information package that they give to the contract employee or employer to where they can share it with their employees. Grounds, equipment grounding, locations of circuits equipment, the type of equipment they're working on, the fire protecting signaling if it's there, conditions of protective grounds if they're there, pole grounds, conditions of the poles. Say I got rotten poles, rotten arms, whatever it is. If it's an existing characteristic and a condition that's it's basically directly affecting the contract employer's employees, then you need to notify. That's as simple as that. So here's what the standard says, just to remind people, working on or near the energized parts, okay? And that's another whole story, I won't go there. Only qualified employees. Now, how do you know the contractor is qualified? Basically, you're not responsible for their training. The contractor says, well, yeah, I've got qualified employees. Well, how did you qualify? You see what I'm saying? Well, a piece of paper signed by the contractor saying Danny Raines has passed the junior apprenticeship program, or he's been working, some kind of documentation saying I'm a qualified journeyman lineman. Yeah, that would be good. Only qualified employees may work in areas containing these energized parts greater than 50 volts. Okay, so that's just about everything they're going to do. All right, so out there's no question about that. And equipment shall be considered and treated as energized. Now here's another one. The word DEAD, dead. A lot of people refer to, I killed it, so it's dead. It ain't never dead. It ain't dead when it's grounded. It's always got current, or the possibility of current flow on it all the time. You don't need to treat it as dead. And matter of fact, DEAD is not found anywhere in a regulation. It's either energized or de-energized, okay? And if you can remember that, that'd be great. Electric lines and equipment shall be considered as energized unless they've been de-energized, checked for the absence of voltage, and grounded. And again, too, when it's that state, it's still de-energized. And the contract coordinators need to watch things like this. There's been a lot of incidents and even fatalities to where induction, backfeeds, whatever, you've got to take care of that. Overhead lines. Now look at that standard, 1910-333. This one comes up quite a bit in court cases because it is what it is. It is a low voltage reference, but it's also referencing all voltages, okay? Not by 1910, the low voltage standard, 332 through 335 safe electrical work practices, unqualified persons is the key to the whole thing, prohibited from doing any kind of work on these low voltage or high voltage lines or medium voltage lines. When unqualified people are working in an elevated position, okay, any kind of elevated position, and just show you how broad that terms are used when it comes to tort liability, OSHA regulations, or anything else. I've had 2 or 3 cases where somebody was working off a ladder and got too close to a primary and got in it. One fell in it. One time the aluminum ladder fell from a tree into a 7620 primary in another state and basically burnt the guy, and OSHA got involved. It was a state plan instead of the federal plan, but the state got involved in it, and then the guy fell off the ladder, and the ladder fell into the primary, burned him, started suing the person that hired him to take the tree down. See, whenever you do things like this, you open the door to all kinds of liabilities and accountabilities. Minimum approach distances. This is something that they really need to look at when they're watching people out there, especially if your contractor hires a subcontractor to do something. How close can they get to it? Because they're not qualified. I can rest assured of that. Well, say they're digging a ditch, say they're taking a tree down, say they're doing something that was not covered in the contract and the host has not provided. So now then they've got a sub out there working 10 feet, and that's just That is a OSHA regulation, and many times it's a state law. The High Voltage Act, like in my state, is 10 feet. Same thing, it follows the same thing. When it comes to training, all employees performing this work right here shall be trained as follows. And these are the things that your contract employees should have had, and they should be able to document it. They got to keep documented records on their employees. And the only thing they have to do for the host is to prove to them that they've had the training, or at least state that they have. Familiar with safety practices, including applicable emergency procedures. Now then, again too, this sentence right here, because it's bolded, and I did that on purpose, that sentence was added in 2014 when this standard was updated. The degree of training shall be determined by the risk of the employee for the hazard involved. What does that say? What are you doing? Are you doing primary work? Are you doing underground work or network work? Are you doing excavation, trenching, and shoring? Or what? And that's why that sentence is written the way it is. Because say substation entry, say you got a substation crew, who can go in that substation? Is the substation energized? Will they be exposed? You see what I'm saying? You can't just, because you either got to be escorted or qualified to go in it, or you got to have qualifications to do that one simple thing, like inspect the fence, open the gate, go to the substation house and work on maybe a voltmeter, or do some engineering. You're not going to do any work in there, not going to do any switching, but you still got to be qualified to go in. And that actually caused a lot of companies to realize they were exposing their employees, and they had no training. They had no documented training. So they had to go back and do some extra work. So if you hadn't had all that, you're not qualified. It's as simple as that. It pretty much stated, any employers doing this work in this section shall be trained, and familiar with everything out there that we just talked about. All right, written contracts, your number one document, your number one tool in the defense of the host is that written document. Now, how that written document is written, that's one of the reasons we went around right before I retired. I think we put classes on it all over the whole state, because we had a lot of people, it was either engineering the contract, writing the contract, or managing the contract. They were bidding it out, and then they'd have contract coordinators. So there was a lot of people involved, and a lot of people needed to understand contractor management and the host relationships. Different types of contracts, cost plus, time and material, a unit-based contract. What is it? There's some I say some of those contracts are not as popular as others. I'll put it that way, from a contractor perspective, because if you got a unit-based contract to set a pole, hang a light, and pull 200 feet a duplex, and you get X number of dollars for that, and you haven't run into a delay or something like that, be careful. I know I was in lighting services for a little while, and that just came to my mind as an example. And I had to go out and do some post inspections, and basically whenever they'd run up on a problem, they'd put a delay code in there, and we had to move cars in the parking lot. Well, I went out there, and it was a church, and the only time cars was in the parking lot was Sunday, and they did the job on a Tuesday. Or I had to trim this tree. You didn't say anything about trimming a tree. There's no trees there. So what I'm saying is, some of the contracts are written, they got to follow the contract, but sometimes there's some loopholes. Just be careful. That's all I'm saying. Performance expectations, including safety. That should be a no-brainer that you're going to work safe. I shouldn't, why do I have to remind you to work safe? Nobody goes out to get work and get hurt on purpose. I know that. You know that. Everybody knows that. But the fact of the matter is, I think we lost about 17 people to voltage contacts and things last year, and I don't know, around 30 people either falls or car wrecks or something like that. It's the same thing every year, so be careful out there. But when it comes to contractors working on it, if these are employees or contract employees, it doesn't matter to me. They're all human beings, and we got to take care of them. Whatever it takes to take care of them is what we need to do. So if the host has expectations greater than standards, as I stated before, it's got to be written down in the contract, the written contract. No, word of mouth won't work. Verbal agreements won't work. And as I said said first early, two things that the host coordinator, and I always go back to this because I run into this quite a bit. You cannot supervise the contractors and you cannot train the contractors. The supervision of the contractors is questionable, Well, this is how we do it around here, or this is how we do it at this company. The only time they really need to get involved is if they're doing something contrary to the contract or the regulation. It's as simple as that. But now, when it comes to training, I heard a statement made the other day. But what happens when you train contractors? They become your employees. They become contract employees. Then you get into all kinds of issues, technical and legal issues that you don't need to go in. That's why you hire them as an independent contractor. And I heard somebody say the other day, well, we sent our crews and the contractors to this training class. I'm going, ooh, I don't, you can if you want to, but just remember there's certain things that can happen as a result of that. And I guess the main thing, and at the risk of sounding like an attorney, and I don't want to do that because I'm certainly not an attorney, you just need to understand something. When a contractor is working on a host system, okay, and they get hurt for whatever reason, they can't sue the person providing workers' comp, their employer. Guess who they go after? It's the host employer. So that's why it's so important to be sure they're working safe without giving them supervision, of course. But you also see, I can think back on some of the liability cases that I testified in, and it's such a sad thing to see an employee first be really injured seriously, if not killed, and the family then goes after what they can, whatever the attorneys tell them to sue. Because if they're working on a distribution system, they'll sue who's made the pole, the arm, the breaker that's looking at the system, the fuse, all the PPE they had on that didn't work or didn't fail or they didn't wear. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. So just remember, contract employees cannot sue their employer. They sue, or the tort liability falls back on the host employer. Okay? Construction coordinators need to have a copy of that contract available, either electronic or handwritten, to where they can refer to. And they also need to be involved in the pre-construction and have good relationships they need a contact person with that contractor to where non-compliance is witnessed. If it's not serious in a stop work situation, who do I talk to and how do I get it fixed? Okay, and then document. Time, place, who, what, when, and where. Because if you don't have all that and it does wind up in court, then it's hearsay or it's recollection. That don't hold up good with juries and judges. Minimums: assure, and review subcontractors' written safety plan. Like I say, the subs coming in to work for an independent contractor are going to be far less qualified. They're only coming out there to do something. And the independent contractor's got the whole job. So it's kind of like a general contractor on a construction site, if you want to look at it that way. Host contractor coordinators must have confirmation of the qualified employees, that document I was talking about earlier, and understood and accept contract conditions. Before subs can do the work, they need to understand this is what's going on this job site, and you got to follow these rules. Well, that ain't the way I normally do it. Well, it doesn't matter. Here's what the contract says. You got to follow the contract if you're going to work for me. Federal motor carrier safety regulations, that's another thing. And that's a really high level exposure, because now then, most of the trucks that's running around out here working for a host, it says contractor working for so-and-so on the door. Well, guess what? The public don't care what's on that door. They just know who you're working for. So they're going to, if they go out and have a wreck or something like that, say they're not qualified. One of the most common things I find doing audits is they'll have a Class B CDL instead of a Class A CDL. Well, a Class B, you can't pull a pole trailer. You know, you can't pull in excess of 10,000 pounds, GVWR. So there you go. But if they're out there, all these little things, and we don't really think about it. Oh, well, they do that all the time. So are they qualified to do it according to the regulations? And that's the main thing. The regulatory is the main thing. Or you're going to wind up with, you know, this is contract work on storm. I didn't have a connector, so I just put a couple of zip ties on. No, that's a joke. But it was actually true. We did find something like that one time on a hurricane. And I'm not sure why they left that way, but anyway, it's a fact. Fall protection, you always look at fall protection. I would never, you know, what does it say, 5,000 pound attachment point? I don't think that triplex is 5,000 pound attachment point. And these are real pictures now. Here's a Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, load securement. This is an audit I was doing down in Florida. This is how they were running up down the road. Stuff was falling off the trailer. And it has a backyard machine on it. And of course, you know, if that falls off the trailer and hits a car, guess what? They're getting sued, the host is getting sued, everybody's getting sued. And that's what I'm talking about, non-compliance. Well, you know, regardless of where you're at, and this is just another audit picture here that I took here where that's the back of a truck. They got gas cans back there and traffic cones and straight line ties and side ties and sticks and shovels. I don't think that's a proper way of storing things. Housekeeping, 1910-22, walk-in working services. That's the violation of that regulation. They're supposed to be in regulation with it. Well, like I say, the host employer definition, generally speaking, is general supervision and authority on the work site, as we've already described. There's no sense in reading the rest of that. You know what I'm saying. And the contractor definition is that's that individual or firm that agrees to furnish materials and perform services for a specified price and controls the details of the work that's being performed above the general supervision that the host has. So they're actually responsible for everything that's going on. The host is responsible for them having the responsibility, and that's kind of the way you have to look at it. The experience, you know, the environmental, assure that safe work environment for personnel, and that includes the walk-in working services and storage and Federal Motor Safety Carrier, the up-to-date testing of sticks and gloves. You know, you're not out there to audit them, but there's nothing that says a coordinator can't walk up and look at a stick or a pair of rubber gloves or a blanket and see if it's been electrically tested as ASTM requires. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you find something, and that may be one of those things where you go to the point of contact with a contractor and say, hey, come here, we need to talk a minute. Safety should be the host general contractor's primary value, whether it be subs, contractors, or whatever. And I need to see your commitment out there. And that's basically what we did. That's what we should do. And then safety management process, you know, to help ensure the contractors and everybody are safe. And that should be, you know, somewhere in the company policies of the host contractor, we should be able to find that program or policy somewhere. You know, just review all the accountabilities and responsibilities. When you see somebody doing something weird, like you want to know a stop work authority, that might be, if that's energized right there, yeah, got sleeves and gloves on, but you know, that's not a good thing. Host relationships to contractors. Again, OSHA determines these relationships as the contractor, company, or employee, and then the service provider working on the host's property. There's all kinds of other policies and procedures that are required sometimes. I'm a contractor. If I come on your system and provide training, I have to have my E&O insurance. I have to have my professional liability. I have to have $2 million worth of commercial vehicle insurance. I have to have a lot of things just to walk on your property and do the work. Now, are we verifying all that? You of course, leased employee, and that's a contract employee. Just remember, a contract employee is no different than a full-time employee when it comes to supervision and training. We have to treat them just exactly the same way we do as part-time or full-time employees. But an independent contractor, they're basically responsible for their employees in providing that same service for their employees as we are, or the host is for them. And again, the subs are the same way. The subs are responsible to the independent contractor that has the main contract and working for them. Safety training relationships, as I said, I kind of just covered that then. If you're an independent contractor, then basically you really don't need to be going to safety meetings for the host contractor. For the host, I mean. Independent contractors should have their own. It kind of gets almost to where it sounds not fair. You want to celebrate the victories and the great things that contractors do. There's no doubt. You reward and recognize what you want repeated. But just be careful from a liability issue of doing that, especially when it comes to training and supervision. Companies provide safety and compliance training as jointly shared safety provider. Now, what I find to be most successful is the host will refer their independent contractor. Well, can I switch on your distribution system? Can you write the switching order and involve my employees in doing that? Well, if they've been trained, okay, and they know paragraph M of 1910-269, certainly you can. I know some companies that do and some that don't. But basically, the ones that allow it, they have a switching list of people. They're qualified. And if you're not on that list, you can't switch. And that's how they deal with that. If you can document the training and document the proficiency, then it's certainly legal for you to do it. New standards expects teamwork in maintaining these proper relationships. As I said earlier, that one sentence that said it's a joint effort between the host and the independent contractor. Site-specific information, instead of just kind of reviewing a few things, confined space, whatever's out there, you need to let them know. Noise levels, permissive exposure levels, the locking tagout systems. They're not going to know your system, and they probably won't know the host's. If they've got specific switching orders and things like that, no. But you got to be able to have a demonstrated proficiency to use them. And again, too, if something happens while they're doing it, be prepared, okay? Host company must ensure that the contractor recognizes and acknowledges the responsibility for their safety. That's the main thing. And then again, the host does not supervise or direct work methods, demonstrate things. It should be written down. Now, if they need to go to a class or a school to learn how to do it my way, then it's up to the independent contractor to go find somebody to train them to do it their way. And it's not for the host to do. Now that again too, the host can have a list of trainers or whatever, third party, that will do it for them, okay? They don't conduct safety inspections for the benefit of the contractor. They conduct safety in observations for the benefit of documenting contract compliance and regulatory issues. And if there's any question about that, I'll be glad to field any questions. Anybody that's seeing this would like to ask me personally a question, I'll be glad to get on the phone with you or email, whatever you want to do. Compliance and quality control. Everybody's interested in quality control, but quality control also includes the contract compliance and regulatory compliance when you're going out there. Effective communications, you got to have that. As I said earlier, watch your verbal communications or phone calls. if it comes down to something very technical or it might wind up in a tort liability issue, it needs to be documented. Always documented. Staffing, host contractor, have a safety concern, contact somebody there. And I think it's so important for that contract coordinator, that bird dog in the field, to have that person. And it may not be on that job site, it may be somewhere else, but have that contact to where they can notify them for those kinds of issues. And coordinate the whole thing. It's really up to the host to do that. They need to train their coordinators. Here's another thing that kind of bugs me a little bit, and I understand it though. A lot of old retirees like me will be called back, may be called back to be contract coordinators. And sure, they know the system. They know how they built part of it. But are they up to date with regulatory understanding? And I think that's probably one of the weak points in that host coordination and communication. Identify these things. And again, I'll give you an example here. A host had a contract coordinator that stayed on the job while a contractor was working 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, all day long. It almost appeared as if they were there as a supervisor. They were documenting everything that goes on, but should they really be there that long every day? No, I don't think so. The most effective construction coordinators and bird dogs I've ever seen, they will show up during the week at odd times, never the same time. Well, Danny's gonna come at 1:30. He'll be here today. Y'all make sure everything's good. No, I want to show up at 6:30 in the morning before you even start and watch you do a job briefing is what I'd like to do. Or the next day, I may show up as you're cleaning up at the end of the day and hurry up and getting through, because, between 2 and 4 in the afternoons when most bad things happen to good folks. That's just the way it is. So, communicate. I can't begin to say enough about that. You're ensuring protection of on-site workers before it begins. You're ensuring the protection of the host employees. Everybody benefits from this effective coordination and communication. Gathers and disseminates information sufficient people right here for each employer to assess the hazard and encountered by its workers. There's a lot of things the host can do to provide information to your contractors to keep them out of trouble. It may be something they've never seen before. It may be something unique just to your system. So be sure we do that. So in this establishment of this effective coordination, coordinate with their contractors, staffing agencies, have a resource list of things. They got to have their own workers' comp list of doctors and all that, but they may not be familiar with where they're at today. Tell them where the nearest industrial health clinic is. Give them the information on emergency requirements. Anything unique to this area that you may not be, familiar with. Those are the kind of things that makes it safe. Harmonize. What does that mean? Harmonize their safety and health policies. The contractor should have their safety manual. They should have their corporate policies. They should have everything. Well, the host certainly does, or at least they should. I just thought of something, but I'm not going to mention that here today. But sometimes we let things slip. When was the last time your policies, your safety manual was updated, things of this nature? You want to make sure, you're in order as the host before you hire an independent contractor to come in. Make sure your people are trained as well as the independent contractors. Harmonize all this together at one time. When you're making these on-site inspections, when you see stuff like this, that's not a good thing. Maybe he needed a taller ladder. Well, I didn't have time to go get one. That's usually what it is. Or I didn't have one out there on the truck. Well, you need one. Effective coordination right here, staffing agencies, as we said, it becomes really important. Safety or production culture. This is what happens. All that guy standing on that top rung of that ladder right there, he was more interested in getting done, finishing, than he was being safe. Oh, I've done this before. I ain't got no problem. Those are the kind of things that, you know, you cannot let contractors do intentionally, because you're just opening a door for liability. They're going to follow your lead. If you're a good host and you're out there coordinating and working with them, they're going to pick up on that right away. I mean, you got to remember, they go from company to company to company. I mean, the reason they're in business is, you know, to make money, of course, but to provide services for hosts that don't have the resources or time to do it. So production culture will set in after a little while if you're not careful, and your safety culture will die in the weeds. And you don't want that to happen, okay? This is typical. This is a video here of a crane falling, and I'll tell you the story in a minute. You see the crane on the left, got the big jib out there. What you can't see, and I'll tell you what's on the end of that cable in just a minute. And all of a sudden, that crane starts to fall. And there it comes. And that car sitting right there, it hit the back of that car at that intersection. The backstory to this right here is that I was standing on the corner. I had just got through doing DOT training for that company right there. I walked out the door and I heard the crane falling, it was rattling. And they was on the end of the cable, there was 6 or 7, they had Christmas tree about 3, they were putting in the horizontal I-beams, and they had about 3 I-beams Christmas tree, and there was 2 or 3 people riding the bottom one, riding it up. And I saw it falling. I said, I ain't never seen a crane fall until now, but I did. And the reason that crane fell is because it was not operated properly. They also had more load on it, and that boom angle was not correct. And when they rotated around, it was set up on soft ground. The track on one side went down, got it off balance, and then it turned. My heart stopped. That was a camera in a police car, and I didn't realize he was even anywhere around. I was the first one to the car, and I saw a baby's car seat in the back seat of that car, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, where did it go?" And she had just dropped it off at her daughter's house, and she was sitting there. You know, when things like that happen, and what they were doing as contractors was trying to hurry up and get finished with that job. That's all it was. It was late in the afternoon. I just got through training most of the day, was fixing to head back to Atlanta. And I walked out of there and saw that, and I'm going, my goodness. I found out I watched the news. Somebody told me, said, well, they filmed it. And I said, oh, well, I need that film. And, but it was just amazing. What we can't do as host contractors is let independent contractors do things like that. You cannot. I always had a rule of thumb. When I had contractors working at the company I worked for years, and I had my crews plus contractors. And so it depended on squeaky wheel gets the grease, whichever one was doing the most high risk exposures. You know, I made it a point to go by there to be sure everything was right. And that's what I'm saying. See, nobody was there to correct that. And that building now, I drove by that building the other day that they were building. And every time I go by that building, I think about it. I'm going, But thank goodness nobody hurt. They jumped off the steel. The steel just fell in a big old pile. The jib hit the trunk and the back window of that car. The lady was okay, got her a new car, and thank goodness the baby was gone. But just think about how bad that could have been. You know, of course, OSHA got involved in that, and there was a lot of litigation that occurred because of that. And then there was some tort liability from the lady that owned the car, because she's sitting in a red light in the street minding her own business, and their crane falls on their car. That's bad. You can't let stuff like that happen. But if you ensure safety, you ensure compliance in here, what does that do? Well, it certainly improves in the working environment, makes it a safer place to be. It provides productivity and reduced costs, okay? Protects the company's reputation. You don't want to have your company with a black eye because of non-compliance of contractors. And the contractors, They've got that EMR hanging over them. They don't want a bad reputation. So think about it. Minimizes the liability, minimizes citations, OSHA multi-employer citation. You know, regardless of how bad it gets, well, you know, that ain't gonna work either. I don't think there's a rule for that one. Yeah, there is too. Tort liability indicates someone held somebody accountable for wrong actions, just like that. You know, if you saw that, what would you do as a contract coordinator? That's a stop work there, without a doubt. So don't go there. You know, those are civil court actions. OSHA ain't got nothing to do with them. In the area of the English common law meant right or wrong, a violation of common law or social norms or civil law, and that's where the tort comes from. The thing about tort liability in civil cases like that, guess what? The last case I just settled last fall, the last case I did, yeah, it was in September, October when that case was settled. That was in 24, and that incident happened in 2017 and 18. So it takes years to roll out. How much money does that cost a host employer to get involved in stuff like that when it can be avoided? That's the thing that just kills my soul. And even if it's an OSHA citation, I had one, the vice president of the company, you know, the lawyers called me in to help with the OSHA regulatory thing. And when I got in, I talked to the vice president of the company that it happened to, and he said, the attorneys has cost me $250,000 to $200,000 so far to do what they did. And I'm going, should have called me first. I work a lot cheaper than that. Of course, I'm not an attorney, but the bottom line is, how much time, how much energy, how much money did it cost them? And they could have avoided it with just simple solutions. Gosh, that's one of the reasons I keep doing what I'm doing, I guess. There's three kind of claims that's brought in tort and liability and OSHA cases. That's provide the workplace and then provide the warning, okay, and then the safety inspection complaints. Those are the three right there that happens more often. If we maintain that relationship, the host independent contractor relationship, it will stand up in court most of the time. I've seen that firsthand from the witness stand and from the courtroom. You know, when things happen, you know, bad things happen to good people, there's the backstory on this. We don't have time to go into all that, but you can obviously see right there that something happened that was energized, and one fatality right there, one severe injury to the apprentice that's still alive, and that could have been avoided had they followed their rules and regulations in their training. While we get sidetracked sometimes as human beings, we are human, we're fallible, we're subject to make a mistake. I know that. I make them all the time. But why we go down that road and let something like that happen, that's a tough pill to swallow. Carrying the victim and then the scene, securing the scene. You know, how do you secure a scene like this from a host company responsibility? You got primaries burned down, you got fatalities, got lights out. How do you secure that scene without, you know, not getting the real picture of it? What caused it? You know, when the host, the first thing the host has to do is investigate everything, and the independent contractor should do the same thing. So when they arise when contractor employees, again, the tort liabilities, since they can't sue their employer, the contractor employer, since they can't do that, then they're going after anybody and everybody. Well, I had 3 or 4 cases going at one time. I had another case going to where somebody got burned, both hands. And anyway, they went after the gloves manufacturer. They went after the manufacturer of the primary breaker relay of the device that was he got burned on. He went after like 3 different people in that tort liability case. And there was 4 people on the job, and all they had to do was look up. They could have seen what was going on, and they could have seen that, 1, regulatory compliance was not being, they didn't follow paragraph M, and then 2, the PPE part was not being done on paragraph G. So, it was all there, and it could have been totally avoided. Failure of that sub, again, it still falls under that tort liability. This is a fatality case here that I had to investigate, and it was a sad thing where a man got killed. They were sitting in aluminum streetlight pole, and well, they had made contact with that single-phase primary coming over there, when in fact, if you look close at the scene, you can see a couple of things. Why didn't they kill it? Why didn't they de-energize it? The host company could have de-energized that single-phase primary because it wasn't even feeding anything. It was a pump that they could have easily had an outage long enough to set that streetlight up. You see what I'm talking about? Coordinating on-site safety inspections, job planning. What we want to do is prevent all this stuff from happening instead of having liability cases to have to deal with. That's my main part. Here's your general duty clause. This is the 5A1. If OSHA writes regulations, like I said, they're minimum work rules. They are not the how to do something. They are the what and why you need to do something, okay? Well, they can't write a regulation for everything, so the 5A1 general duty clause comes in, and that goes all the way back to 1970 when they started writing these rules and regulations. They were smart enough then and now to know that there's things that we do out there, especially in our world, in the utility world, there's not a rule for. So now that's why you got a general duty clause. That is a hazard that a host employer or an employer must recognize, train the employees to recognize them, provide the PPE or provide the work practice to basically protect the employees while they're performing the task. And that's what it is. Now, if it's a contractor doing the task, that needs to be in their contract. If they can't recognize it, then they need to do something different, have an outage on it, whatever, and then do it the safe way. This is another one of the pictures of another audit that I did a long time ago. And you can see one boom has a rescue device on that upper boom, and you notice the other boom doesn't have one. So there's all kinds of issues with this one particular company right here. And unless you look up and know what's supposed to be there, you would never know it. So that sub and contractor qualifications, again, it all meets the same contract language. It doesn't matter what role you're in this thing. We've got to all do and work in concert and harmonize to prevent things from happening to the employee. The observations by the host contractor has to confirm either safe or not safe, either correct or reward, or thank them for doing what they're supposed to be doing, doing what they get paid to do. This is another picture I took of another contractor working in Florida is where it was taken. I was down there for something else, and I walked out of a restaurant and I looked up, and this is what I see. And basically, if you look at that picture close, you can see several different exposed bare points. Nobody has any protective equipment on. There's no sleeves, gloves. There's a rated Mac hanging against a pole without being secured, or a gut on the Mac, something halfway covered up, no path to ground difference of potential covered up, a little bit of the primary is covered up and secondary, neutral, none of the secondary. Those are the kind of things right there that, now did anything happen on that pole? No, I called that guy down. I said, look here, Bubba, what are you doing? He said, well, and I told him who I was. And he looked up and I said, well, look, you got bare point. You got bare spot everywhere. And that was 12 kV. Stirrup over there in front of his material handling jib. And I told him, I said, you don't even have your gloves on. He said, well, we don't wear sleeves. I said, well, there ain't nothing wrong with that, but why don't you cover all that stuff up? I ain't planning on getting around those bare spots. And I said, well, Bubba, I said, you know, it's your business. But people get hurt every day or killed every day doing this right here because they don't cover up. He finished that pole up and I went back by later. Everything was fine. But see, that just proves how good we really are in our business. Yeah, we can do a lot of things that may not be in compliance, or it may not be legal, if you want to look at it that way, or it may not be in compliance with our written contract, but we got it done. But then again, too, there's a lot of people it does happen to. Regardless of how good we are and how long we've been doing it or nothing, yeah, it just doesn't matter. I have people tell me all the time, I don't need your cover-up training because I've been doing this for 25 years. Okay. The last person I taught in a class that complained about the contract or the cover-up, basically after about, I think 3 or 4 months after that cover-up class, he backed into a switch and got burned up. It didn't kill him, but he got burned up. And I'm going, you know, I'm sorry. I don't want to see anybody get hurt anywhere. So when we kind of wrapping things up, host general contract companies should identify the potentials out there of subs and contractors. We used to have a list, a good list and a bad list. We would get feedback from other companies that we knew that these contractors had worked for, and we keep those records, and then whenever the contract group would start letting bids out, they'd let them bid on them, they'd call them immediately because we don't want you working on this system. So confirm the past performance. You know, you have a network of host contractors. You know, if you work for company ABC and I'm FG, you know, how'd they work over there? Did they get through on time? Did the quality control, did you go back and inspect it? How many times did you do job observations? Did you ever find them doing something that was not quite right? Of course, you can always go back and look at OSHA regulations too. You know, it doesn't matter whether it's line work or process safety management or hazardous controls, materials. There's documentation on everything out there. You know, process safety management for chemical companies. It doesn't matter what you're doing. And then again, too, the Federal Motor Safety Carrier regulations. It's just like OSHA. It's a different federal group. They have records too. It's an MVR. Did your contractors run an MVR? Have they had their drug tests? Is their health certificate up to date? So there's a lot of different, I guess, resources that you could actually go back and look and make sure they're qualified to do what they say they are qualified to do, okay? And it's real simple. It's not that much. Contract employees here for the host company completely responsible for host employees, drivers, CMVs. I know, but for the contractors, no. Like I said, the document in their training files, this is a qualified person. And I know I went to one of my union company, union halls that supplied linemen to the company I worked for. And the only thing I do is go up there and look at their driver qualification file to see if it was up to date. Because when they were actually contract employees driving company trucks, my company's trucks, we didn't want somebody not qualified driving a company truck and get involved in an accident, because all you're doing is opening the door to litigation if you do that. You can always look in the 1904 in record keeping and find out what's happened to people, and also through OSHA. When you look at the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, you look at their records and you can see what kind of litigation or what kind of citations were issued, things of this nature. So the 1904-31, the covered employees here is what we're talking about. Self-employed partners, employees on payroll. You don't keep accident records on independent contractors, they keep them, okay? The independent contractor is responsible for having their own OSHA 300 log. So that's simple as that. You don't keep up with their records, but you know what I've said earlier, that's going to affect their EMR. As part of the contract select process, demonstrated ability to perform, history, interviews, and also here's your OSHA, run a 3-year or a 5-year and just look and see. Look at what we're looking for right there on performance evaluations, satisfactory, experience modification rate, at least 3 years. You should have an EMR of 1 or less. The OSHA citation history, 5 years. You're looking for willful or less than serious or serious violations, or even up to de minimis, which is not much, and that's not a monetary penalty. They don't even hardly issue those anymore. But if you find a willful violation of an OSHA regulation that's resulted in serious injury or fatality, you better watch that bunch, okay? And some of the largest contractors working on utility systems out there today, some of them have a questionable record. I'll just leave it at that. Experience modification rate, as I said earlier, that's the factor that's based on the individual's company's loss experience. That's what it's all about, okay? It's got to be less than 1 many times. And here's your OSHA citations we talked about. Other than serious, willful, or a repeat, the repeat is just as bad as willful. That means I've already been there one time and inspected or investigated, and guess what? I come back, look 6 months later, a year later, and I see the same thing. Ooh, that's not good. So those are the kind of things that it's either a qualifier or a disqualifier, or possibility. And the de minimis, like I said, that's a non-monetary penalty, which they used to issue some. It means, hey, you didn't do what you're supposed to do, but I'm not going to penalize you for it monetarily. Orientation, like I said, we're about finished here, but I want to make sure that we have that orientation pre-construction meeting here prior to the start of any work, especially if it's a new contractor. The host really needs to sit down with them and say, look, this is the rules, here is the contract, here's what we expect. The expectations need to be set, okay? And of course, the objective here is not to beat up anybody. It just means that you want to make sure that here's what you can expect from me, and I want to know what I can expect from you. And that's all that really is, okay? The preparation and awards, you have to be careful. There's a time period between bidding and awarding a contract. And I know we had to make some policy and changes and rules at my company before, because once the contract is out for bid, and then until it's awarded, you have to be very careful with relationships and things, because it looks bad. That's the only thing I'll say about that. You don't want to have, lunches and things like that, or something, it's just, it's one of those things. Unless specifically written exception, OSHA and consensus standards, contractor minimums. In other words, the expectation of the host for the independent contractor, you're going to follow the regulations, and that's in the written contract. So if you violate either one, the written contract or a regulation, you violated your agreement with me. Once these expectations are established, they should take care of themselves. Whether it be general industry or construction, it really doesn't matter. State and local regulations, if there's anything exceeds, like in a state plan, say the western states, California, Oregon, and Washington, and even Alaska, they may or may not glove above 4 kV out there. Well, we've been doing it here for years. I mean, I gloved 4 kV when I was a helper on a line crew, but we won't go there. And that was a long time ago. But if you have those kind of exceptions, it needs to be in your contract. Make sure those job briefings are done. That's the only thing I can say. 5 points of that job briefing. How well should everyone plan? Hazards, work practices, special precautions, energy source controls, and PPE. Make sure you highlight those things. The employer shall ensure, okay, that the employee in charge conducts this job briefing. There it is. That's my little banner that I made years ago to kind of remind people what the topics were. Well, just a few pictures. Again, if you walked up on that, what would you do? here's a good example here. Probably this is just recently. And what you're looking at, there's a double dent in on that wooden arm. The left side of that arm right there is de-energized. The right side of that arm is energized. They're about to put a P6 pin or whatever in a high-non insulator and build a jumper over that arm and heat this up on the other side. Well, I didn't take this picture. One of my guys did on the job site. And then the next thing I know, he's standing there looking, and he called me. And look what that gentleman's doing. He's got a hot 7620 primary in his right hand, and he's got the other gloved hand on the grounded end, or a difference of potential on the polymer, and the bolt on the arm. And he called him, and he said, "Hey, Bubba, can you come here a minute?" So he come down. He said, "Why'd you do that?" He said, "What are you talking about?" Now, this is typical. It's not the only time we've ever seen this. He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You had the hot primary in one hand, a ground in the other." He said, "No, I didn't." He turned around, showed him the picture. He said, "Well, here it is." And he said, "Well, I didn't know I did that." See, that's the human fallibility of the fact that we're human beings. The less we make observations and see things like this, we can't address it, the greater the chances of something bad happening to us. That's just the sad part about the work. And I was a lineman for over 20 years and supervised them for another long time. Linemen sometimes are not thinking about what they're doing at that second. They're looking at what they're fixing to do 10 seconds from now. And we kind of lose focus on what we're doing. Those are the kind of things when you're observing contractors you need to catch, okay? That pre-construction meeting will set the expectations. As I said, and many times it's got to be documented. It should be documented. That clearance list, if you're going to be switching on them, you've got to be on it. Responsible for furnishing all their tools. This is another one of those, I don't have enough blocks to do this reconductoring job. Can I have some of your blocks? Well, you just open the door. I don't have a 10-foot ladder in that substation. Can I borrow yours? Well, you just open the door. You furnished them tools. So now then, you have given them tools to work with. Guess who they're going to sue if that ladder breaks or whatever, or if that block breaks. I just had a block break not too long ago. Monitoring the compliance is the main thing we got to do out there for contractors when they're working. And it doesn't matter. This is a city employee right here, by the way. And I was in a parking lot, and I looked up and I saw that. I said, I got to have a picture of this. Of course, nothing happened. It's all good. When you see things like that, though, you got to fix it. Well, that contract coordinator is the key to the host, their relationship with that independent contractor. So they're there for billing and safety and compliance. They're a key player in contractor compliance and management. Make sure those contract coordinators are qualified to do what you expect them to do and protect the company. That's basically my message right there. And then have that written copy of the contract. And this is not a staged picture, by the way. This is in a substation. And I drove up to visit the crew, and they'd gone to lunch or something, but the bucket was sitting there, and I took that picture, and I'm going, I don't think that should be that way, okay? But that was a contractor working on a crew for a host. Just remember, all the laws pertain, not just the ones you're familiar with. They're all out there, especially if it's hazardous materials or anything else. Contractor is responsible for maintaining good housekeeping on work sites. Don't let them the laydown yard. Look at there what I found right there on another job. They were changing out all the old transformers that had been there for a long time in this place and reconducting the underground. And look at the oil spill. EPA would not like that. But yet that's a contractor working. So I had to make them come back and clean all that crap up before they could leave. And again, their working area many times is not taken care of like it should. That's one of the more common violations. Immediately notify if anything happens. Does the host investigate that accident? They should investigate that accident. If it's a violation of regulation, serious, and OSHA gets involved, they're going to. But can that host safety person or trainer or someone from the host company be present with that investigation? Yes. Just don't, look and listen, okay? Don't offer anything until it's all said and done, until the case is settled. If they cause outages on the system, then you deal with that, serious incidents. Especially, if they're working out there and lock a breaker out, something has happened. Either an insulator's broke or they've not covered up, they've done something. If they've caused damage, especially if the public gets involved, guess what? Now the public's coming after the contractor and the host. So that's the tort liability side of the whole thing. Any incident that results in contractor injury has got to be reported. There was a time in the past where, oh no, don't tell me what you did, you just go fix yourself. Or if you damage customer property, don't do that. No, that's not the way it should be done today, but that's the way it was done many years ago. That's their issues, not ours, but since it's a joint effort to coordinate, yeah, it's part of mine now as the host. Any incident that results in injury to the public, especially, like I said, monitor it. Anytime there's significant damages to facilities, company property, private property, vehicle accidents, anything out there. Of course, they got to follow the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. If it's a DOT reportable, they need to let you know it's a DOT reportable, and that is if either vehicle gets towed, if anybody's, obviously, if it's a fatal accident. We just had one of them. And also if somebody is not treated at the scene and released, but they go to the hospital. If they go to the hospital, that's a DOT reportable. That's a different log for reporting accidents that their company has to, but as a result of them working for you, you ought to verify that it actually occurred the way it was. Contract administrator should confirm violations. That's who it needs to go back to, because these are records that'll determine whether they get to ever come back and work on my system again or not. And that's basically the way that should be played. All violations should be documented. The host general contractor should intercede in any and all contractor work activities when there's imminent danger. There's a stop work. That's just the way it is. You see violations of 1926-650, excavation, trenching, and shoring, failure to wear PPE, fall protection, anything of this nature, or sometimes we can get creative and to do whatever it takes. And of course, any kind of aerial device that basically, if it's non-compliant, or if it's out of the DOT, or if it's out of the OSHA regulations, it needs to be fixed. Monitoring the contract compliance and the imminent danger is so important. Don't let people get hurt. So here's what your standards are now, 1910-269 and the 1926-950 revision. These all occurred. Now then, there's the construction and the general industry standards now are merged. There used to be a difference between the two, and there was some confusion between what construction was written in 74, the general industry in 94. A lot of things happened, and finally they merged back now all together 20 years later in 14. So it's all one, okay? They basically, all they did then in 14 was what we started with at the very beginning. We took the multi-employer citation policy now. It's included in the 269 standard, and it's done. And it separates those 4 kinds of employers. And it's really up to the host employer to maintain that relationship right there, okay? Fill out the evaluations, as I said. document the information, share it with other host companies that may be probably fixing to hire them a contractor. Make sure that you're not going to open the door and let somebody come in that basically has a bad reputation. And that's what the documentation is all about. All of this information here was put together as a result of a fatality case that happened in a state. And I was asked to put this on to kind of separate the independent contractor and the host contractor's responsibilities and accountabilities, and then demonstrate how now that it's a joint effort between the two of us to actually make sure it's a safe work site for all the people and everything. As a result of that, there was several lawyers, like I said, the insurance companies were there, all the players were there. They all heard this presentation right here, and everybody said thank you and left when I got through. So I'm in the belief that I hope I've interpreted it the way it should be intended. I've given you some examples of things that I know that are out there that you need to look for. And I want to keep everybody safe. And if this is what it takes, understanding the rules and regulations better and the working conditions and everything else, then let's do that. But other than that, thank y'all so much for tuning in today. I've really been enjoying being in South Carolina again, except for the cool weather. It's an open-sided tent right here, and we got a little breeze blowing in, but at least it didn't rain. That's one thing I can say, Brent. You did good, son. Thank you again. God bless, and we'll see you next time.